Welcome to a retro gaming thing. I'm trying to downsize my retro PCs as they're all in the ATX format, and that takes up a lot of storage space and a lot of space on my desk. So today I'm going to build this general purpose, cheap and small retro gaming PC. This is my current retro PC case, which, as you can probably tell, I painted myself. To be fair, it is very useful with both a 3.5-inch floppy drive and a Gotek floppy emulator, as well as an AT power adapter up top. But it is quite large and pretty ugly, so as you saw in the introduction, I've bought a smaller case to build my next retro PC inside. Now, the first thing to say is please ignore the smudge of thermal paste on the front of the case. As you can tell, the case isn't brand new. I've had it a couple of weeks, and it was me who put the Windows sticker on there as well. That said, you can buy these for £25 delivered in the UK, so I thought I would do a bit of a review at the same time as I complete my build. Inside, the case is mounted for micro ATX, both narrow and wide, with space for two 80mm fans. Up top there is space for two 5.25-inch drives, as well as your standard ATX power supply. The case does come with a hanging drive cage, but I removed this for my build. But now, onto my cheap build and the parts that I'm going to use. First up is the motherboard, which is an OEM Socket 370 board. It's got AGP and PCI slots only, with no ISA slots in sight. This is what kept it cheap, and it cost me £25. The CPU that I'm using is a 1GHz Pentium 3 Coppermine CPU. I have no idea if the board supports Dualitins, but they aren't really that cheap anyway. I only have one PC133 stick of RAM in my collection. It's 512MB and it should work fine, so I'm going to use that. I've got a nice copper Cooler Master heatsink, and I've put a modern noise blocker fan on it, which should keep things quiet and cool. For my video card, I've got a bit of a choice, ranging from a Nvidia 5900 XT down to a Savage S4 Pro. So I decided on this Nvidia MX440. It's fairly fast for a Windows 98 build, and it's cheap, and it has a DVI port, which I've grown to like. This is a 128-bit version with 64 megs of RAM. For sound, I want to do DOS gaming, but I am limited to the PCI slots on my motherboard. I've got two potential sound cards, a Sound Blaster Live and a Yamaha YMF744, and I haven't decided yet which one I want to use. So let's get building. Installing the CPU is easy enough with the zero insertion force lever thingy, but applying thermal paste requires a little bit of care, as it is only a small exposed CPU die. On goes the CPU heatsink, which only goes on one way and requires quite a bit of fiddling to get right. With the RAM installed, I think it looks pretty good, so let's put it in the case. I installed a CD drive in one of the 5.25-inch bays, but it doesn't really leave any room for a power supply. And it turns out there isn't really enough room for both a CD drive and an ATX power supply up the top. It's just too short, and this is with a CD drive, which is quite small. So I dug out my small form factor power supply, which luckily does fit. The case only takes ATX power supplies, but luckily my power supply comes with a ATX adapter bracket thing. For storage, I'm using an 80GB IDE drive, but I've set the jumpers to 32GB so that it works with older motherboards. The drive will live in the top of the case, out of the way, so I fitted a bracket to make it fit. I just prefer it this way, it makes the case look a lot neater in my opinion. With all the cables going on, there really isn't much room for anything up the top. The power supply is modular, which helps a lot, but it does mean I have to use a lot of adapters for these older drives. The case itself does have a lot of openings for the routing of cables, which is good to see. But now it's time to install the motherboard, and even without the drive cage, it's a bit of a squeeze in there. The case has riveted standoffs in micro ATX configuration, and again a good few holes for cable management. With the board screwed in, I called it a day and left it in good shape to carry on in the morning. In the cold light of morning, I think the build is looking pretty good, with only a few cards left to install. First up, the GeForce MX card, and then for sound, I decided on the Yamaha. Real OPL trumps ease of use, it would seem. I hooked up one of the fans with a low noise adapter, which is just video of my arm, and now we're ready to test it out. And it boots up fine. The video card works, the RAM is detected, and the drives are all receiving power. It also is really quiet, which is great for it being usable every day, and something I've grown to appreciate more and more as I get older. I did have some problems, however, with the sound card and video card conflicting, I think. I tried setting different values in Windows, and then I tried in the BIOS, and then I gave up and swapped in the Sound Blaster Live, for now, because I have a longer term solution in mind. But for now, with everything set up, let's test some games. The first game is Driver, which is the only game I've held on to since I bought it new back in 1999. As you might expect, the game runs really well thanks to that fast CPU, and the game makes use of the Live's EAX abilities too. The next game was Half-Life Blue Shift. Again, it ran flawlessly, as you would hope on a system like this. As you can probably tell, I haven't actually played Blue Shift before, so I was getting lost quite a bit. I have the Half-Life Generations pack, so it's making use of high quality textures and models, I think, as well. This is being captured at 1024 by 768 resolution. Now for some DOS gaming. I make use of both Sound Blaster Live drivers and a DOS setup menu from Phil of Phil's Computer Lab, so thank you very much, Phil. You've saved everyone from a lot of faffing about. I've got a few games I'd like to try, and first let's try Lemmings, because this is a good example of the Sound Blaster Live working well, and it emulates OPL2 FM synthesis quite well on lightweight games like Lemmings. Next up is Tyrion, a game with one of my favourite DOS game songs in it. Again, OPL2 sounds pretty good, but this game can also make use of the Sound Blaster Live's general MIDI capability. Now for some actual gameplay in Jill of the Jungle. This is the GOG version, but it runs fine in DOS. OPL and Sound Blaster sound effects work really well, and I started getting stuck into this great game once I had mentally adjusted to the slight delay between pressing a key and Jill moving. finally, Duke 3D, a game that will show the Sound Blaster Live running out of steam. Here's the OPL2 emulation, which plays far too slowly. And here is the proper speed in general MIDI mode.
Let's rock.
It runs fine at 640 by 480 resolution with decent sound effects and a great general MIDI soundtrack, until it didn't anymore. Okay, so I have no idea what that was about, but other than that, I think this computer makes a great retro gaming PC. It's got all the power to handle Windows 98 games. The DVI output results in great image quality in Windows, and the motherboard supports legacy USB keyboard and mouse input. Sure, later games that can run on Windows 98 won't run that well, but those games are going to be quite happy on Windows XP, where a far more powerful system can be used. Having said that, I'm already eyeing up my next small Windows 98 PC, although this one isn't going to be quite as cheap as the one I've built for this video. The PC case is very good, with cable management options and no sharp edges. Its size is both a strength and a weakness, so just be sure your drives will fit. And with that, thank you for watching, if anyone still is, and happy tinkering.